Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
The files are located on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway. The fluorescent lights above flicker on and off. Open the door on the right. In the bottom drawer of a file cabinet, there it is, a folder labeled with 3 words that are poured onto stories. Stories of history, stories of people, stories of death. I'm Luke Poling, and this is Famous Last Words. It's one of the many musical questions that have been asked across the ages. How do you solve a problem like Maria? Is she really going out with him? Have you seen your mother, baby? And, maybe most suitable in this case, should I stay or should I go? Well, we're here to remind you of the mess that became of the life of Caroline Lamb, an Englishwoman with the gall, the nerve, and the chutzpah to think that she could be free and wild and acting the same way as the men around her. Caroline once described last week's feature player, Lord Byron, as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. And that's a great way to describe him. But unfortunately, it might also apply to Caroline herself. And she is fascinating, or rather, what happened to her is fascinating. And what makes it fascinating is that when spinning that roulette wheel of life, she ended up on the same color and number as a lot of the men around her. But what happened after that is completely different. Is society to blame? Is Caroline herself to blame? Or, to put it another way, should we just lay the blame on luck? Caroline Ponsonby Lamb was born on November 13, 1785. Her father, Frederick Ponsonby, was the 3rd Earl of Bessborough, and her mother, Henrietta, was the Countess of Bessborough. One of her descendants actually ended up being Diana Spencer, Princess of Wales. Lady Caroline's childhood was difficult, with her overcoming a variety of illnesses, including one caused by worms that almost killed her. When she eventually recovered, she ended up living with her cousins because, according to some accounts, she was difficult to control. So difficult that her mother reportedly gave her laudanum regularly and hired a special governess to help control her. Caroline was a tomboy, reportedly functionally illiterate, and claimed that washing a dog was her favorite thing in the world to do. And that does sound like a difficult child to deal with, but it should be noticed that her parents were likely too busy fighting with each other to actually parent. Caroline began to read and write and educate herself on the world and was likely incredibly intelligent. Through this self-education, she also became incredibly religious, looking to God for a lot of the answers. Lady Caroline got married in 1805 at the age of 19. Her husband, William Lamb, was a politician and an heir to the first Viscount Melbourne. And no doubt her parents looked at the whole thing as she's now someone else's problem. While the marriage was arranged, there actually seemed to be some true love between the two. Caroline gave birth to 3 children, 2 of whom were either stillborn or died within 24 hours of delivery, and the third, a son named George Augustus Frederick, suffered from severe mental problems. However, instead of placing George in an institution, which was standard practice at the time, Caroline insisted on raising him at their home. Between the difficult recoveries after each pregnancy, William's political aims, and the challenge of raising their son, the relationship between Caroline and William began to break down. Her guilt over sex didn't help things. Neither did the fact that William's family called her the little beast. With all of this going on in her life, is it any surprise that Caroline sunk into a deep depression? However, things began to look up in March 1812. Caroline began a passionate affair with Lord Byron. Meeting at a party, she ignored him, which apparently made Byron's passion for her stronger. And it is at this party that she reportedly described him as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, which is still a pretty good description of the guy, and is still used today to describe him. Caroline also inadvertently predicted her own fate when she said, "That beautiful pale face is my fate." In public, the two trashed each other. In private, they pledged their love for each other. Combined with all the other guilt and mental trauma she was dealing with, this created quite a problem. She was obsessed with Byron. Byron described her as, quote, "the cleverest, most agreeable, absurd, amiable, perplexing, dangerous, fascinating little being that has lived now, or ought to have lived 2,000 years ago." The two had all types of sex, and all over the place. She would dress up as a page boy as part of their role play. She'd sneak into Byron's bed in the middle of the night. When William found out about the affair, he was upset. No shock there. And he took Caroline to Ireland to try to break them up. However, when she returned to London in 1813, her passions had just somehow gotten even stronger. Some have described Caroline as history's ultimate crazy ex-girlfriend. And while it is a good description of the woman, it does seem to clear anyone else of their role in this whole thing. Shortly after returning to London, at a party for the Duke of Wellington, Caroline saw Byron talking to another woman. She responded by breaking a wine glass and threatening to slit her wrists. Clearly, she was not in a great headspace. Byron didn't take it all that seriously, writing that she just, quote, performed the dagger scene, referring to Shakespeare's Macbeth. And Caroline's behavior didn't grow more normal, in fact, the opposite. She wrote poems about Byron. She stalked outside his house. She left books inscribed with the words, "Remember me," written on the inside. Byron in turn wrote a poem which included the line, "Remember thee," as a response. She also sent him clippings of her pubic hair. At this point, Caroline began to lose weight. She swung between crippling depression and bouts of absolute mania. It's around this time that Byron chose to write to her and say, quote, "I love another. I am no longer your lover." Shockingly, this did not make anything better. Caroline decided to step things up a notch and hired girls from a local village, had them all dressed in white, and then burned Byron in effigy while her and the girls chanted a poem that she'd written for the occasion. In 1815, Caroline's first book, Glenarvon, was a thinly disguised version of the affair with Byron, which is the first work featuring a Byronic hero outside of Byron's own works. It sold well because people wanted to read about the spectacle. But one of the unintended injured parties was William, her husband. Remember him? No politician really wants their wife writing novels where the political character is a serial philanderer. So it was probably no shock when William finally asked for a divorce in 1825. Caroline's mental stability was somehow even more fragile than before. Her drinking had become excessive, and she was firmly addicted to laudanum. On top of that, when Byron died, one of his friends wrote about the final days, saying that Byron just didn't mention Caroline, and he thought of her as just another fling. Oh, and a terrible wife. He made sure to mention that. Caroline now found herself completely alone. She wandered around Europe. She ghost-wrote another book which tanked. When she returned to London, she was declared insane. Caroline Lamb died on January 25, 1828, at age 42. Her last words, hearkening back to an easier time, she said, "Send for William. He's the only person who has never failed me." And what about William Lamb? Well, he served in Parliament and eventually as Prime Minister. Lord Byron, who, as we learned last week, was living a pretty goth lifestyle long before there was a name for it, became a legend. And Lady Caroline Lamb? She was cast off, first by her family, then by her lover, and then by history. Famous Last Words is written and narrated by Luke Poling. That's me. It is produced by Heidi Hegquist and myself. Our assistant producer is Sabrina Thompson. You can find the show on Facebook under Famous Last Words Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram, where we are at Famous Last Words Pod. And if you want even more famous last words, find us on Substack. at Famous Last Words.
Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Welcome to Creepy Tapas,
where we do the opposite of deep dives and bring you tiny tastes of terror connected by a common ingredient.
true stories to haunt and chill you and the pop culture they inspired.
Or at least the movies and books that remind us of them.
Join us as we descend into darkness,
beginning with the lighter side of our weekly topic,
and wrapping with a full dark, no stars account of terror, madness, murder, and more. It's Creepy Tapas, y'all.